And welcome back, everybody, to DEFCON 28 Safe Mode, Blue Team Village. We have our next talk for the day. We're going to have Bill talking to us today. No question, Teamviewer, Police, and Consequence. So take it from there, Bill.
Hello, everybody, and happy end of the world to you. The purpose of this talk is to explain a situation I'd found myself in last year, to detail a breach from the perspective of a small business. After the story itself, I've got a couple ideas relating to bringing the bigger ideas about security to some of our smaller clients. Alongside that, I wanted to make it clear to anybody who feels the familiar sting of the imposter syndrome that you're capable. I'm presenting this as a narrative, more of a story than a formal presentation. The overall scale of this breach is probably something much smaller than most of you are used to dealing with. But I do know that there are some people here from small businesses that tune into the BTV, because I'm one of them. Online, my name is corvusactual, and I'm the co-owner of a small 4-person IT shop in Canada. This is the story of what a breach looks like for a small business, start to finish. So we start about a month before the breach itself with my very first trip to DEFCON. I was overwhelmed with the opportunity. Everybody says when you get there, there's so much to do, but there really is so much to do. I've been watching DEFCON videos for years. I spent quite a bit of my time at the Blue Team Village, since that's at least a part of my day job. I wanted to see if I could pick anything up from between the talks, the CTF, and the people milling about. I was given access to the CTF VPN at the same table as everybody else. But here's the thing. I flew to DEFCON completely solo. So even though I later hooked up with the Lonely Hackers Club, I stumbled through the first bit of the CTF without anybody to bounce ideas off of. I was absolutely thrilled to have captured a good handful of flags on my own, both sitting in the hall outside the BTV and later on in the weekend. The reason I mention this, though it falls outside the actual breach itself, is because that experience, maybe fueled by the mana of so many like-minded people, gave me the confidence to jump in there and fight it out, solo or not. I really believe that. I felt like I had some kind of drive or motivation that wouldn't have ordinarily been so handily available, thanks to the community behind the Blue Team Village at DEFCON. So fast forward a few weeks and I'm sitting in front of my workstation at about 10:30 a.m. I get a call from a coworker who has seen a weird log file that's been left on his workstation. He noticed this text file left open with a mishmash of characters, some sort of encryption. The file referenced a location on his system that threw a trigger in his head, enough to call somebody and talk it through. C program data FKL. After a short chat, we both set to work on Google to look for information on this folder, who we had just discovered was set to hidden. Interesting. After a few keyword searches, we found a link to a number of sites selling software called Family Keylogger. Uh-oh. A little deeper now, we started to look into the hidden folders. We saw logview.exe, the program for viewing the logged keystrokes as advertised by the site selling the software. When we clicked to open the program, it was password protected. All the usual default passwords didn't work. A quick Google search didn't provide any results for default credentials. Uh-oh. So finally I logged into a number of other computers via Teamviewer. On all the major systems I had access to, we found the folder. I could feel that deep, gut-turning anxiety start to bubble up as the situation started to spin. I immediately tasked our other techs to meet at the infected client. They're an organization with size and scale, but unfortunately not a lot of budget to be thrown at traditional IT security stuff. So no IDS, no IPS, nothing to track logs. Add to that, no 2FA, no ongoing employee training for cybersecurity stuff, and minimal formal policies in place. So we have these client machines and they're online. There's an unknown number of them that are infected with this keylogger. During this time, in the course of about 40 minutes, my coworker hit a stroke of good luck. After copying out the FKL folder for backup, he started deleting one file at a time, just to see if one of the files was locking the program. He found it, again, just by dumb luck. By deleting one of the files in the client subdirectory, he managed to unlock that database, showing the logged key presses and, most importantly, the vector for uninstalling the application cleanly. At the same time, I emailed the vendor. They noted, of course, that if we bought a license, they'd be able to unlock the application and provide uninstallation instructions. So our technicians got to work backing up found copies of the program and uninstalling it from infected machines, while I handled the servers separately. At this time, it was about 5 p.m. I was, in all sincerity, overwhelmed. Beyond the scope of this problem, our business was expected to maintain operations and fluidity to the rest of our support issues. The rest of our clients needed to be supported, and regular business was to continue as normal. I was dejected. I was defeated, especially after freshly returning home from Hacker Summer Camp. I just felt like I'd been had. When my wife arrived home, she told me to take a 20-minute break to clear my head, before giving me the best instruction anybody in crisis could get. Get after it. Fix this. I know you can. But this is where the human side kicks in. This is where I feel like I've already lost. I know I'm going to have to provide something, anything, in an email to the people involved. And I don't know really where to start. I've worked in IT for more than a decade, but I don't have any formal certifications in security, or I didn't at that point. I felt like this was getting way past my skill set and into territory that I definitely wasn't comfortable with. I knew, though, that somebody had to start, so I just sort of logged in and got to work. Without any real direction, I just started. I backed up log files from Teamviewer before looking through any of them to a separate system for safekeeping. With no formal training in forensics or chain of custody, I figured it was a good idea in any case just to get copies of those log files just in case. In some instances, I found the Teamviewer date_logfile.log had been deleted. Luckily, we had off-site backups of that folder where we could retrieve the log files from before they'd been deleted. Secondarily, we had shadow copies as well. I found a couple servers where the attacker had deleted the log files, but strangely, some of them were left untouched on other servers. At this time, the local municipal police had become involved. A detective from their cybercrime unit had come to the main headquarters of our client to chat with the co-owner of our company. I asked my partner to let the detective know that I was digging, to stand by for any information that I'd found. I recognize now that just getting started and just getting to work and diving in there without formal training could have cost the investigation. But in a real-life situation, as it was happening with real-life consequences, that's the decision I made. I just decided at that moment to dive in there and get to work. I started looking through the Teamviewer connection logs. I figured I would start with the easiest infiltration vector, or the easiest vector I could think of. The remote access application installed as unattended on the servers themselves. I considered other options. I was at least aware of USB rubber duckies that could have been preloaded with a script and dropped in the parking lot, or an installer dropped in from an exploit or something like that. I figured I would just start at the very bottom and work my way up. I'd start with what I knew how to handle. I scrolled through a handful of logs, stopping abruptly on seeing a peculiar username having accessed one of the servers. Okay, That's something. I made a note of the username and kept digging. I started noticing this username everywhere. When I say everywhere, I mean in multiple Teamviewer logs on multiple different servers and workstations. Generally speaking, this user was accessing systems well outside of our standard operating hours. Most of the connections were happening around midnight, some of them just after. Many Teamviewer installs had another user added as unattended, named the number 0. We had to access every system in the agency to ensure this user was disallowed any further access. Nonetheless, I documented multiple file transfers and remote control sessions from this user. In the Teamviewer logs, I had dates and times with a connected username. I figured Teamviewer would be able to lend a hand in getting more information together. Since the client's systems were all installed as unattended, I suspect the attacker waited to find one of our technicians' Teamviewer credentials to log in and access that list of unattended systems in the agency. Without evidence, though, I can only assume. Alongside the detective from the cybercrime unit, we asked Teamviewer to help. We were swiftly transferred to a legal department who told us that since Teamviewer's servers were located in Germany, we would require international warrants to have any data about these connections compiled and sent for use in a criminal investigation. At the time, I thought that was just absolute bullshit, but I do get it. It was frustrating because we were in the middle of that scenario as it was developing. So I felt all this pressure on top of my shoulders to just summon these fixes with people who were not unwilling, but unable to help. I had an old contact at Teamviewer that I sent an urgent message to. He called back and lent some advice as to where we could look through our own log files for any more information. You have to figure we're looking at maybe 20 or so log files that span several years, sometimes 2 or 3 years, a real good chunk of data. At the time, the best I could muster was literally mouse wheeling through those things. But I had this little indicator, that username, to chase after. During this time, over the period of about 4 to 5 hours, I started up my laptop and began scouring the internet for OSINT. I'm not really sure why I did that. Maybe just to bounce the username off of the internet to see if anything useful came back. Well, I found a user on Twitter with, believe it or not, the same username that had logged in over Teamviewer. Scrolling through their post history, I found, believe it or not, a post about the very keylogger that was installed on our systems. So obviously, I doubled down on my efforts in OSINT for about an hour and pulled all kinds of relevant information. For example, we found an email address in the configuration for the keylogger where the logs were being pushed to. The Twitter user shared a Facebook account with several email addresses published with the same username. I found multiple references to nefarious stuff on the social media profiles linked to this person. I even found the same username dumping hashes on a cracking forum. And then, the breakthrough. An IP address was found in a Teamviewer log file that coincided with the time the external user logged in. I ran it through a quick IP geolocation search on Google and found it traced back to a small town in Ontario, Canada. The same small town both the Twitter and Facebook account were declared as being from. Now we're going to refer to the attacker as bad guy. I brought this to the attention of both the detective and the client. I put together a dossier of all the information I'd found and handed it over to both parties. I figured it'd at least be a good starting point. Here's where things get tricky. This person, referenced on social media, was actually known to the organization as being a person who was enrolled in their services. The story takes a brief pause here as the justice system lags behind the real world. Fortunately, in time, the municipal police were able to secure a search warrant for Bad Guy's house. On the arrival of police services, Bad guys' devices were on and doing bad guy stuff. They were taken for analysis, and bad guy confessed in full on site. After a few weeks, the analysis came back. Bad guys' computers were full of all the usual stuff. VMs, multiple pirated keyloggers, PDFs with instructions, videos, all that stuff. Signed, sealed, and delivered, right? Well, something happened. During the 5 months this process took to finally wash out, something must have happened. No question. I was told there was no question that bad guy was responsible, had conducted these unauthorized connections to the network, and that he had the means to do so at his ready. I wasn't told specifically why the charges were dropped, only that it would be difficult to prove his intent was malicious in nature. Okay. At the end of the day, I think this is how bad guy got his initial access. I don't think this was a particularly technical attack. I'm not nearly as skilled at detection and forensic stuff as some folks around here, but this is what I think happened. The organization didn't have hard policies in place about clientele using the organization's systems. I'd heard through the grapevine that this was happening, but you all know how that goes. An email goes out to leadership saying this shouldn't happen. The email goes down the chain, but at the end of the day, no policy equals no action. I believe bad guy had an opportunity at some point to either access the system directly or, which is the more likely scenario, just snapped a picture of the Teamviewer splash screen with a cell phone. They could have accessed the system, likely not locked or turned off, later on that night and started to infiltrate from there. But here's the kicker. Bad guy got his devices back and is back on site accessing services from the organization. So that's awesome. All told, we learned a pile of valuable lessons. We're a small shop, and yep, I've read about situations like this. I'd say we made it out lucky from a scenario that could have been much, much worse. Most of you will be able to read between the lines here and identify points of failure on our part that led to this type of breach being a possibility. I think the largest problem that small IT shops face is the juggling act required to keep all the elements of business equally sorted. I remember from the Blue Team Village last year, a panel on small business cybersecurity that touched on that. The concept that cybersecurity is sometimes left as an afterthought with some of our smaller clients from budget limits or lack of concern or understanding, but the same threats and outcomes still exist. At last year's DEFCON, I played a game of D&D with a guy who gave me a great little piece of advice. Present controls to mitigate risk and defer responsibility where those controls are not used. Right or wrong, I think it's a great starting point for guys like me. I think there's some use in talking about the after-action side of things too. For the people that work in smaller environments and hail from smaller companies, I've seen a subtle gap that exists right before a certain sized organization, where cybersecurity starts to matter more to the people in leadership roles. These are a couple things I've been doing recently that seem to help bring more hesitant people around to the idea of tightening up security around the network. If you're selling security services, this stuff might help you talk about your stack. But I think for anybody in a position where you're talking to end users about security, these 3 things might be a decent idea. Define the why. Really, I'm trying not to use LinkedIn like business speak here. I've used this specific idea. It works for me. Chip away at the organization's goals until you can directly attach data security to the primary function of the business. Forests Ontario is a local nonprofit that I pulled off of Google. They help rebuild forests around here. They have the following goal. Forests Ontario is dedicated to making Ontario's forests greener. Our ambitious tree planting initiatives, extensive education programs, and decades of community outreach have resulted in millions of trees being planted each year. You could just as easily write a few edits into that statement when talking to shot callers about security to start emphasizing the importance of security. For example, Forests Ontario is dedicated to making Ontario's forests greener. Our ambitious tree planting initiatives, extensive education programs, and decades of community outreach are powered by scheduling software, email, and a company fleet of laptops, and have resulted in millions of trees being planted each year. I've used this approach to help frame cybersecurity not as an element of IT infrastructure or something that happens in the server room, but as the starting point to building a culture within the organization that values security as part of how the whole thing runs. Without cybersecurity, we can't do the things we're trying to do. Find a framework. Most of the smaller organizations I see out there have very, very little security infrastructure. Most have next to zero staff training. Most rely on the IT guy to just do the security magic and do it quietly and do it cheaply. Find a published framework that you can use to better explain why you're introducing security controls that cost cash and convenience. For instance, we found the baseline cybersecurity controls for small and medium organizations from the Canadian federal government to be of great help with both translating some of the technical side and actually implementing controls. I found even if the client calls you to help set up and secure a network, a written and industry-accepted framework can help, as Jocko Willink might say, prioritize and execute a short list of must-haves from a long list of would-be controls. Lastly, start talking about it. This seems really obvious. Out there in the offices, I see a common theme between most of our clients. Some just give us money to fix the blinky lights. Others want us to verify that we're using every minute of each build hour. The thread that runs between them is this. When I talk to them about security, they tend to listen. Now, that doesn't always translate into putting better practices in place, but I can usually at least get a window to speak at a staff meeting, to start building that foundation at the very base of the organization, and at least start the conversation about cybersecurity. This seems like a given, to just talk about security. Too often, though, our clients are caught up in the grind of their day job, and they don't have time to worry about security. More often still, users assume the responsibility of security falls onto the guy in the server room, not the person at the reception desk. Purposefully bringing a quick briefing on cybersecurity to monthly staff meetings or as part of a smaller team meeting helps keep that topic on the table. One of the benefits of security, cringy as it might be to some of the guys who have been around DEFCON forever, is that information security still has that cool factor to a lot of people who don't directly work in IT or around security. If you really put some investment into bringing security into the conversation, like any other part of your life, it pays you back. I have to say, speaking at DEFCON is an absolute moonshot for me. There are times I had felt like one of the only guys in my town that was interested in hacking. From a place of true gratitude, I thank you all for the opportunity. The hard lesson to learn is where your weaknesses are. Working through the breach last year served to detail exactly where our failures were. Since this event, I've started to swing for some certifications. I fundamentally shifted my focus. At the end of the day, it's all up to you, and nobody's coming to save you. Please feel free to DM me on the BTV Discord or drop your questions in the BTV Discord so I can respond. With collectives like the Blue Team Village, we can fortify ourselves to meet real-world challenges, even if we're not fully ready to fight, because we have to. Thank you.